Atheists tend to be very confident that their worldview is the most scientifically provable.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Welcome back, everyone, to Bridge the Divide, where I examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that often follow, and how we, with education, rationality, and reason, can bridge the societal divides that they create. Today, we're going to take a look at a video from the channel Bible Stuff, which, from what I was able to find out, is a relatively new channel that started out by pumping out generic stock footage videos with overlaid narration by this guy, but I'm pretty sure now just pumps out generic stock footage videos narrated by an AI voice all about Bible stuff.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
And while theistic content like this is generally pretty low tier, as these types of videos are usually just collections of assertions not really intended to elicit any kind of response content, I do find them kind of interesting because they demonstrate how the evangelical movement, in its attempts to stay relevant in the modern age, has devolved to the point where pumping out AI voice-read apologetics cliches to potential converts seems to have become a far more preferable tactic than having legitimate conversations about what they believe and why with real people.
Computers your life, aren't they?
Yes. Perfect hiding place.
Now, in this particular video, which appears to be one in a series called False Teachings, the anonymous host's script makes several claims about atheism and what atheism entails that I'm sure many of you are very familiar with.
It's like deja vu all over again.
But despite that familiarity, I still think there are some important things that need to be parsed out here for viewers. So let's dive in and see if this Fundie bot channel is actually trying to convert people with argumentation and evidence, or if the entire effort here is just another clanking assembly line desperately churning out lies and self-validation. The floor is yours. Bible stuff.
Atheism is the belief that there is no God.
That's not a good start, but keep going.
While I know that the whole discourse surrounding the definition of atheism essentially boils down to one of semantics, I do have to point out that when you're presenting a definition for a word, especially when you're setting the tone by kicking off your entire video with it, it's probably important to present a cited definition that at least agrees with what you're saying. And while I have no interest in descending into the bowels of the Steve McRae arena to argue what the concrete definition of atheism is, while simultaneously ignoring how the context of the conversation can alter that meaning, I do think it's necessary to establish here that the self-identifying label of atheist or atheism does not entail that the person is making a positive knowledge claim that no God or gods exist. It's important to remember that while belief and knowledge are related, they are not the same.
Same, but different.
A person can believe that no God or gods exist because they have been convinced of that belief, while simultaneously not knowing for a fact that no gods exist, essentially concluding from a probabilistic standpoint that doubting their disbelief would be irrational until sufficient evidence is presented by the positive claimant for the existence of such an entity or entities.
Atheists consider atheism to be the most logical and scientifically based worldview.
Reductive presentations such as this, which appear to be all the rage with apologetic content creators, tend to aggravate the literal crap out of me. Don't get me wrong, I completely understand why he's presenting it this way. It affords him the opportunity to push the cult narrative that non-believers are just irrationally close-minded. But to answer his question, yes, atheism is a position that is logically grounded and therefore justified. But atheism itself is neither informed nor concluded strictly by scientific endeavor, hence the existence of naturalistic theists and supernaturalistic atheists. Everything we know about science could be wrong or right, and it could still very well be the case that a god or gods does or does not exist, as they are not mutually exclusive concepts.
Conversely, they also believe Christianity to be one of the most illogical worldviews based solely on blind faith.
Given the way he's presented things so far, I'm a little surprised it took nearly 20 seconds to get to the first lie. No, atheists do not hold that Christianity is one of the most illogical worldviews based solely on blind faith. Basic logic exposes that the Christian worldview, or pretty much any theistic worldview for that matter, is illogical, and all for the same reason. Because there exists no mechanism to differentiate independently from mind and context an experience concretely coming from a god, and an experience one has been conditioned to believe is coming from a god, then to conclude that such an entity is the explanation behind any given phenomena requires that the claimant first beg the question of the existence of such an entity, given that existence itself is a first-order property and must be confirmed independent of mind and context before anything like a nature or action can be ascribed to it. In short, because the theistic worldview is predicated upon a logical fallacy, that makes everything being derived from that fallacy illogical.
In this video, we will see why atheism is scientifically impossible.
You serious?
We'll consider some scientific evidence for the existence of God.
Fascinating.
We'll see whether it's Christianity or atheism that truly requires blind faith.
Door number 1.
And finally, we'll get to the heart of why atheists really refuse to believe in God.
Ooh, so exciting.
Atheists tend to be very confident that their worldview is the most scientifically provable.
So this statement, given that it is a complete misrepresentation of what science and atheism are, makes exactly zero sense. Science is a methodology or tool that is utilized to explain phenomena that we perceive in the natural world. Atheism is literally just not possessing the belief that a god or gods exist. When it comes to explaining phenomena, yes, scientific explanations that are backed by evidence-based predictive models are thus far the best at doing so, especially given that invoking a god as the answer is not an explanation, it's just an assertion. An assertion, by the way, that is backed by no evidence. But what really strikes me here is that the claim is made that atheism is scientifically impossible, which, by my humble estimation, has to be one of the stupidest things I've heard in the last quarter, given that atheism is not predicated upon scientific understanding, and science itself makes no statements about the existence or non-existence of any god or gods. But as ridiculous as that was, I have to say I'm pretty curious how Bible stuff guy here is going to back up that nonsense.
However, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that this simply isn't true.
The first thing you've got to present is the evidence that your God actually exists, meaning that it exists independently of mind and context. Cause, for all intents and purposes, it would go a long way here. Once you've done that, you can then move on to explaining the mechanistic relationship it has to the various phenomena that we experience in the natural world. But until any of that happens, you really don't have a leg to stand on.
First, consider the fact that one of an atheist's most foundational beliefs is based on a scientific impossibility.
Here it comes!
That is, that the entire universe as we know it came from nothing on its own.
Oh, Jesus, not that crap again!
Ah, this old hat. Yeah, this has been debunked ad nauseum, so I won't spend a great deal of time on it. Suffice to say, neither atheists nor cosmologists think or believe that everything in existence came from a literal philosophical nothing, whatever that could actually be. However, it must be pointed out that theists do hold to this idea. They hold that their God existed eternally, that it necessarily pre-exists the set of things that are not God, and that it actualized that entire set literally out of nothing. So not only is his assertion there a false dichotomy and therefore fallacious, it's also pure projection. And the fact that this has been explained to apologists all across the internet enough times I'm pretty sure this guy has access to it, the continual pushing of this fallacious assertion means that they are outright lying.
Atheists pride themselves on believing solely in things that can be observably provable.
That's also not true. Now, the first thing we have to point out here is the distinction that he is failing to make. The way he's invoking observation here means that he is talking directly about observations made with the naked eye. And he is not talking about observations in the scientific sense in which things are measured. There are many things that have been demonstrated to be true that have not been directly observed with the naked eye, generally by virtue of the measurable effects those things have on the things around them. If you happen to be looking for more information on this Bible stuff, I suggest you check out this newfangled concept called a black hole. That or just watch Interstellar because it's pretty badass.
Come on, Charles.
The problem with what he's asserting here is that by implication, if an atheist happened to be on a jury for a murder trial, then they would, simply by virtue of being an atheist, vote not guilty because they themselves did not witness the murder. And that's simply not how evidence works.
Yet, physics has never once confirmed an instance of something spontaneously arising from nothing.
Again, no one is claiming that something came from nothing other than theists themselves.
If someone were to leave an empty garage unattended for an indefinite period of time, no matter how much time passed, a car would never form on its own.
We got the point the first 2 times you mentioned it. There's really no need to pad your runtime by repeating yourself.
This sounds so obvious that it's laughable, yet atheists believe that the entire universe spontaneously formed on its own.
Well, that's a different claim than everything coming from nothing. But still, no, atheists do not believe this. The evidence-backed predictive models currently in use indicate to us that the physical universe that we occupy is a result of natural, unguided forces, and is foundationally composed of energy which has always and will always be there. So far, Bible stuff, all of this has just been white belt apologist lies. Lies, by the way, that are often fed to ignorant Christians to poison the well against science and non-believers.
Along these same lines, one has to consider the theory of biogenesis.
See what I said about poisoning the well against science there? First, I'll state simply, biogenesis is not a scientific theory. Please stop perpetuating that lie. In actuality, the 19th century term biogenesis has multiple meanings that cover a variety of things, such as the sexual and asexual reproduction of life from existing life, the synthesis of chemical compounds in living organisms, and the process of mitochondria growing and dividing. It's a descriptive term, not a scientific theory. A term, by the way, that was coined back in 1858 by Rudolf Virchow in his counter-hypothesis to the now long debunked hypothesis of spontaneous generation. And back here in 2024, we now understand that life as we know it can develop from organic chemical interactions, which is precisely why abiogenesis is currently the strong working hypothesis that explains how life originated on this planet. And though we don't yet know all of the nuanced mechanistic details of the process of abiogenesis, we can rest easy on the fact that everything that is included within the developing model we can unequivocally demonstrate that we have access to. Unlike theists who cannot even demonstrate that their God exists to have access to, let alone invoke it as a mechanistic explanatory cause for anything.
According to biogenesis, life can only come from pre-existing life.
Yes, that is one of the things that biogenesis describes, but it doesn't apply to origin of life research. So you bringing it up here is nothing more than a straw man born out of your personal incredulity and some desperate need to feel like you're somehow special in the universe.
Life cannot come from non-living material.
To put it somewhat mildly, the term life is at best fuzzy in what it's trying to describe. And this also goes for non-living material. Do we consider the naturally occurring bonds and reactions between elements in nature as a form of life? No, of course not. But is it within the realm of possibility that life as we understand it could be a result of those naturally occurring reactions and bonds? Absolutely. I think I'm beginning to see exactly why this guy is deliberately keeping things so vague and reductive. Because if he even tried to stick a toe into the multiple scientific disciplines that back up these working hypotheses, his assertions would fall apart faster than he could call upon his God to save him.
But not only do atheists believe that something came from nothing when the universe was born,
no we don't.
but that at some point in time, life would have had to have come from non-life.
True, these initial developmental stages of life are not classified as life, but they are understood to be the necessary precursors for life, and we know that they occur in nature under the right circumstances. You've essentially identified exactly why biogenesis is not a scientific theory and is just a descriptor of one facet of the phenomenon we call life. But of course, this is not a debunk of origin of life research, and even worse, it's not evidence for his God. Even if everything we knew about abiogenesis was completely wrong, that still wouldn't be a justification for asserting that a God did it. You still need to demonstrate that your God exists before you can claim that it did anything.
While it may contradict atheism,
No, it doesn't, Bob. No, it doesn't.
the theory of biogenesis actually agrees with Christianity.
Wait, really? So you believe that your God is in fact a living organism with its own genes that it can then pass down to its offspring through the act of reproduction, because that's what biogenesis is describing. Now, if that were to be the case, it certainly would explain the common ancestry that we observe amongst all organisms through the field of phylogenetics. But then, which genes are exactly the, God genes in all those organisms' genomes that we've mapped? And if all those genes that we see organisms have in common are in fact God genes, then why are they indistinguishable from non-God genes? But if that's not the case, and all genes are God genes, then why exactly would your God ostensibly obfuscate itself as naturally occurring organic chemical bonds? Obviously, your assertion here opens up the door on a litany of very hard questions that you must first answer before you can claim that your assertion is true. Unless, of course, you're just playing fast and loose with the definition of biogenesis in order to link it to the claims in the Christian worldview. But you wouldn't be that intellectually dishonest, would you?
The Bible teaches us that all life did in fact come from pre-existing life. And not just any pre-existing life, but the source and creator of all life, God himself.
I guess you would be that intellectually dishonest. And I don't think I have to waste any more time explaining how you're begging the question of the existence of your God in order to claim that what is asserted in the Bible is true because it came from your God.
And this isn't the only scientific evidence for Christianity.
Whoa, hold your horses, man.
You haven't presented any scientific evidence for Christianity yet. You just pointed to a God that you asserted exists without giving any evidence to back up that assertion, and then dishonestly adjusted the term biogenesis, which specifically refers to life coming from pre-existing life, a classification, by the way, that has some pretty serious criteria such as genetics and a reproductive process, just so that you could claim that your God qualifies as being alive, even though your own worldview classifies it specifically as a spirit and not a living organism. And you did all of that just so you could point at your Bible and claim that it backs up your assertion. This is what happens when you dishonestly and arrogantly twist the evidence to fit your worldview, instead of honestly and humbly adjusting your worldview in light of the evidence. And we're going to go ahead and skip this next section, because he just asserts that because the car has a demonstrable designer, then the universe, and by extension life itself, must also have a designer, even though he can't demonstrate it. All while ignoring that the car is not analogous to the universe or life itself, that even if the universe were in fact designed, there is no evidence to indicate it was designed by the thing that he thinks designed it, and that assuming that what is true for parts of the whole is necessarily true for the whole itself is a fallacy of composition. He then implies that atheists don't believe a God exists simply because they haven't seen one for themselves, thus committing an argument from ignorance, which is again another lie. And he tries to back all of this up by, you probably guessed it, quoting Romans 1:21, which again is not evidence for his claim, because it's just cult nonsense specifically designed to validate believers by strawmanning non-believers.
Having said all this, as much as a Christian and an atheist could debate science, and as useful and beneficial as science can be, science itself isn't enough to provide full definitive proof of the origins of the universe.
Well, it certainly doesn't yet, but that doesn't mean that it can't. This is just your personal incredulity talking.
This is simply because none of us were there to observe and test whether or not there was a Big Bang or a big God who created everything.
This is again a misrepresentation of how evidence works, but it is interesting how he slipped his God in there in order to draw an equivalence between accepting Big Bang cosmology based on the observable evidence and the predictive models generated from the application of that evidence, with the emotions-based faith position that believers have that their God exists and created everything.
I am very, very sneaky, sir.
So ultimately, both beliefs have to rely on faith.
No, they don't. We have evidence and predictive modeling that gets us closer and closer to the truth. You have baseless assertions held simply because they make you feel special.
We are not the same.
However, Christianity is not a blind faith.
It most certainly is. That is, unless you can demonstrate that your God exists independent of mind and context. Feel free to do so at any time.
The Bible itself, especially the Gospels and Epistles, is written eyewitness testimony to actual historical events.
I think I understand why this guy used a speech generator to record this video. It's probably really hard to record a script that lies so much you'd have to read it staring at the floor. First, as any legitimate biblical scholar, both believer and non-believer, will tell you, the Gospels are most certainly not historical eyewitness accounts and are strictly theological claims. This conclusion is borne out by the fact that they were written decades after the events purportedly took place, the lack of verifiable authorship, the multiple narrative contradictions, and the lack of independent confirmation of the events, just to name a few. Secondly, the epistles, or letters, which account for 21 of the 27 books of the New Testament, and whose authorship is traditionally attributed to Paul, are also not considered historical eyewitness accounts. The fact that none of Paul's purported original works still exist, that not all of the Pauline epistles can be attributed to Paul himself, and that the letters are composed pretty much of unverifiable claims, we can reasonably conclude that the Bible is evidence for nothing more than the existence of the Bible. And anyone who tries to convince you otherwise is either profoundly ignorant of the scholarship surrounding their own holy book, or they are outright lying to you to serve their own ends.
And not only that, but we also have our conscience.
The fact that our species possesses the evolutionary trait of empathy, which is what allows us to make distinctions between what we have subjectively determined to be good and bad or right and wrong. In fact, the phenomenon of human empathy is well explained and understood via naturalistic means.
Is it really a coincidence that our conscience happens to be based on the law of God, the 10 Commandments?
I have the feeling that you're way off on this.
Holy shit, did you put the cart 30 miles before the horse? You do realize that human beings have been plunking around this planet for more than 250,000 years longer than Christianity has existed, right? Even complex human cultures, or what are referred to as behavioral modernity, was established over 50,000 years before Christianity reared its ugly head. From the evidence, it's more than obvious to see that religions throughout human history have done nothing more than simply co-opt basic human social dynamics. Behaviors that, in our struggles to survive on this planet, we'd figured out over 100 millennia before organized religions even became a historical thing. Now, I can't say if this guy is or is not a young earth creationist.
Things that make you go, "Ugh."
But I only have to point to the wealth of evidence that debunks this ridiculous claim.
We instinctively know that it's wrong to lie.
Dude, a basic course in behavioral psychology or child development easily debunks this. It's well documented that not only is lying a natural part of human behavior, but it's also a developmental milestone. As humans begin to self-actualize, they will lie with total abandon to avoid perceived consequences until they're conditioned by their parents or other authority figures through negative reinforcement not to do so.
Steal, murder, and the rest.
As for theft and murder, these are legal terms that describe basic human behaviors in very, very specific contexts. Behaviors, by the way, that are completely natural, especially when it comes to brute survival. Now, while the members of a society can come together and agree that stealing is unjustified and therefore unlawful, a truly desperate and starving human being will grab what they can when they can to survive. And this also goes for murder, which is a legal term that describes the unjustified killing of another human being. But how that justification, or lack thereof, is determined by the individual, and whether or not it's agreed upon by the society in which that individual lives is also entirely subjective. But in the wake of discussing all this moral relativism, we cannot forget the one ultimate theist escape clause. That you, Bible stuff, as a believer, despite what you've said here, would, with joy in your heart, commit any one of these aforementioned offenses, and so many others that aren't fit for description on YouTube, if you truly believed that your God was commanding you to do so. It's likely that no one ever told you, but cloaking your moral relativism in a God concept does not suddenly make your moral distinctions mind-independently true.
Atheism cannot account for that.
Well, atheism doesn't make any moral proclamations. There are atheists that are moral realists, just as there are theists that are moral relativists. Science, however, can explain why human societies tend to, albeit not universally, classify certain behaviors as immoral, and it does so through the field of evolutionary game theory. When the objective of the group is to survive, and by that measure we take steps to keep people as safe and happy and healthy as possible during their lives to maximize that survival, we find that cooperative actions between the members of the society lead to more positive results in the long term, while selfish actions among the individuals lead to more negative results long term. And our evolved capacity for empathy is ultimately what facilitates that survival.
Ultimately, though, a lack of evidence is not at the heart of why an atheist, or anyone, rejects the existence of God.
Not only is that another bald-faced lie, but that also implies that there is sufficient evidence for the existence of your God. Please feel free to provide it at any time.
Right before Romans 1 tells us,
and I'm going to cut you off there, because the existence of the Bible is not evidence for your God. Just as the existence of the Odyssey is not evidence for the great pantheon, nor is the Quran evidence for the existence of Allah.
This is ultimately why the atheist rejects the existence of God.
No, that's a cult manual written specifically to validate the beliefs of its members, and it does so by strawmanning the non-believer. Here's a novel idea. If you truly want to understand why an atheist doesn't believe in your God, try fucking talking to one. And from here, we can skip the rest of this nonsense because it's just more citations from the Bible, more begging the question, and how much evidence did he provide for the existence of his God that he's predicating his entire world upon?
Zero.
All in all, I have to say that this is probably one of the worst apologetics videos I've ever responded to. But I'm glad that I did. Mostly because this video is a perfect example of the very ridiculous, very ignorant, and very real conversations that evangelicals are having with the scientifically and philosophically ignorant people that they are trying to convert. And given the extreme level of intellectual dishonesty on display here, I know it seems almost counterintuitive to try and bridge the divide. But I think that we still can, and in my opinion, the best way to go about this is found in education. Getting your science and philosophy educations from those professors that work professionally in those fields is the best way to arm oneself against the incredibly deceptive practices employed by the more insidiously religious-minded. Individuals like this engage in this type of behavior because they are either ignorant themselves and are simply repeating what has been beaten into them over the years, or they're well aware of why and how they're wrong and they're simply lying to you in order to accomplish their own goals. Either way, the entire endeavor is only interested in one thing: exploiting the ignorance of others in order to achieve its own ends. When you're able to fully understand where the lies are coming from and why they are telling them, you'll be better able to distinguish between the theists that are actually interested in understanding where you're coming from and those others that only see you as another means of self-validation. It's only through the active facilitation of positive dialogue that truly positive change can be made. But at minimum, we can at least learn that we can disagree and yet share space peacefully. All the while demonstrating that while antisocial, self-serving behaviors may make those individuals feel better about themselves in the short term, but in the long term, there simply isn't any place for such behaviors in a society that strives to continue surviving and progressing. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. And be sure to leave a comment below. I love reading your responses, and those interactions help with the dreaded algorithm. Don't forget, November is Homeless Youth Awareness Month. A link to where you can support these important efforts is down in the description. And if you like what you saw here and would like to support my channel further, the links for channel membership and to get yourself some official Bridge the Divide gear, like my new shirt, which YouTube only shows the back of because the front has a dirty word on it, are also in the description. Once again, a massive thank you to each and every single one of you for your continued support. And as always, be safe, be excellent to each other, and together, we can bridge the divide.